It was a warm evening in the city, the kind of night that made the streets shimmer with the reflection of neon lights and the distant hum of cars. The lounge they had chosen was tucked away on a quiet street, exclusive and hidden, the kind of place that promised luxury and secrecy in equal measure. The scent of expensive perfume mixed with the faint aroma of fresh cocktails, giving the place a heady, intoxicating atmosphere. People moved with a quiet confidence, their laughter low, polished, and almost rehearsed. It was not the kind of place for casual visitors. She walked in first, her heels clicking softly against the polished wooden floor, carrying herself with a calm that masked her alertness. She wasn't someone to be underestimated, though she didn't look threatening. Her eyes, sharp and observant, scanned the room instinctively. Even in a crowd, she had a way of noticing the smallest details. That's why she saw it before anyone else. The glass that had been passed to one of the guests. The slight hesitation in the hand that handed it over. The almost imperceptible tilt as if the liquid inside had been tampered with. He came in after, dressed in a tailored suit that looked effortless, the kind of man who could enter a room and immediately command attention without saying a word. Wealth seemed to radiate off him, not in a showy way, but quietly, like someone who had everything yet never felt the need to prove it. Around him, people whispered his name, their expressions a mixture of respect, admiration, and in some cases fear. He was always aware of the power he held, yet there was a side to him that only a few got to see. A cautious, almost vulnerable edge that the world rarely witnessed. The fiancée followed closely behind him, her smile perfect, her movements precise. She was everything that seemed flawless on the surface, elegance, charm, confidence. But there was something in the way her eyes flickered, almost like a secret she was trying too hard to hide. She laughed at a joke that no one else heard, sipped her drink with careful attention, and watched him with a calculated expression. There was an air of tension between them, subtle but undeniable, something that only someone paying close attention could notice. The black girl moved closer, subtly positioning herself near the table without drawing attention. She had a natural way of blending in, of being present without being noticed, yet she saw everything. And tonight, she saw something that made her stomach tighten. The drink in front of the fiancé, the one that seemed perfectly innocent, had been touched in a way it shouldn't have been. A flicker of instinct told her that this wasn't just carelessness, it was deliberate. She leaned in just enough for him to notice, her voice soft but firm, almost a whisper against the low hum of music around them. "There's a drug in your drink." He froze for a moment, his expression carefully unreadable, but his eyes flicked toward her with sharp attention. That split-second acknowledgement said more than words ever could. She didn't need to explain further. He already understood the weight of her warning. In the world he lived in, a simple misstep could become a scandal in an instant, and tonight was one of those moments that demanded absolute caution. The black girl didn't look around or fidget. She remained steady, calm, as if she had said what needed to be said, and now it was his turn to act. The tension was almost tangible, the kind that made the room feel smaller, tighter, every subtle movement magnified. He gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, and shifted his attention back to the table, his mind already racing through possibilities. The fiancée, unaware of the warning, sipped her drink and smiled at him, completely confident. But he didn't return her smile. Not yet. Instead, he studied her carefully, watching her hands, her expressions, the way she reacted to conversations around her. There was a slow, calculated observation, the kind that only someone who had dealt with betrayal and deceit countless times could perform. He didn't want a scene, not tonight, but he needed to know the truth before it was too late. The black girl moved subtly, taking a seat at a nearby table, but close enough to keep observing. Her presence was a quiet reminder of vigilance. She had seen too many situations spiral out of control because someone ignored their instincts, and she wasn't going to let that happen tonight. She sipped her water casually, her eyes never leaving the subtle movements at the table. Every glance, every small gesture spoke volumes to her trained eye. Minutes passed, the room filled with laughter and music that didn't quite reach the tension that hung in the air. The billionaire excused himself briefly, moving in a way that suggested he had a plan forming in his mind. He approached the bar, speaking softly to someone behind the counter, his words calm but loaded with authority. The black girl noticed the quick exchange, a barely perceptible hand gesture, a nod, a shift of attention. It all added pieces to a puzzle that was forming, one that could either protect or destroy everything in that room tonight. Meanwhile, the fiancé remained unaware of the danger, smiling, engaging with others, the perfect image of composure. But there were cracks, tiny ones, that only a careful observer could see. A slight hesitation before answering a question, a brief glance around the room that didn't match her words, a subtle twitch of her fingers. They were small, almost invisible to most, but they were enough to make the black girl's instincts scream silently. She remembered the first time she had learned to trust those instincts. It had been a situation that could have ended badly, a warning ignored, and the consequences had been serious. She had promised herself she would never ignore the small signals again, and tonight she wasn't. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing lightly on her shoulders, a mix of fear and determination. Back at the table, the billionaire returned, his demeanor calm, almost casual, but there was a noticeable shift in the air. His eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, a silent acknowledgement that they were now aligned, understanding the stakes without a single word exchanged in front of anyone else. The fiancée continued her conversation, oblivious, laughing softly at a joke that was probably rehearsed. The black girl decided to move closer, just enough to be within earshot but still not draw attention. She wanted to stay invisible while staying vigilant. She had learned that in moments like this, visibility was danger. People noticed too much, and the wrong person could misinterpret even the smallest gesture. She took a deep breath, calming her racing heart, reminding herself that control was her greatest weapon. Suddenly, the fiancé's phone buzzed. She glanced at it quickly, smiling, then slipped it into her clutch without reading the message. It was a tiny moment, almost insignificant, but the black girl noticed. There was a rhythm to human behavior, a pattern to reactions, and even the smallest deviation could tell a story. And tonight, the story was unfolding in subtle, almost invisible ways. The billionaire, sensing the critical moment approaching, raised his hand for a quiet toast. The black girl observed from her vantage point, noting the tension in the fiancé's posture as she lifted her glass. There was a hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the kind that betrayed inner conflict. The black girl's instinct screamed louder now. Things were about to escalate. She leaned closer, just enough for him to catch her eyes, and gave the smallest of nods. It was a silent agreement, a signal that it was time to act carefully. They couldn't rush. Any wrong move could turn suspicion back on them, or worse, ruin the night completely. But patience, strategy, and vigilance were their tools, and they needed to use them well. Music played softly. Conversations continued around them, but the room seemed to shrink, focusing on the unspoken tension at that table. Each movement, each glance carried meaning. The fiancé laughed again, not realizing that her carefully constructed image was beginning to crack, even if only in the eyes of those paying attention. The black girl remained alert, every sense heightened, yet her demeanor calm. She had learned that fear and panic were useless in situations like this. Observation, patience, and precise action were the keys, and tonight she was ready to use them. As the evening progressed, small interactions unfolded that hinted at the complexity of the situation. Subtle glances, whispered words, hidden gestures. They all formed a network of clues, pieces of a puzzle that only someone attentive could solve. The black girl took it all in, silent and steady, knowing that what she had seen tonight might be the difference between disaster and control. By the time the first round of drinks had passed, the billionaire had already started forming a plan. It was quiet, calculated, a strategy that would test his fiancée without causing a scene. And all the while, the black girl was there, a silent observer, a guardian in the shadows, ensuring that every move was measured, every risk accounted for. The night was young, but the tension was palpable. Something was about to happen, something that would reveal truths that could no longer stay hidden. The black girl had said her warning softly, carefully, but the moment had already set a chain reaction in motion. The billionaire's eyes met hers once more, a silent understanding passing between them. Vigilance was now their ally, and deception would not go unnoticed. And so the night stretched on, each moment charged with anticipation, each movement heavy with meaning, as the city's lights outside flickered like distant stars, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing inside the exclusive lounge. The next morning arrived quietly, but the events of the night before were far from over. The city moved on as usual, People hustling to their offices, taxis weaving through traffic, cafes filling with the aroma of coffee and bread. But for the billionaire and the black girl, nothing was ordinary. The tension from last night lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. Every detail, every glance, every subtle gesture had been stored, examined, and understood. It was like a puzzle they had only begun to solve, and the pieces were starting to fit together. The billionaire sat in his private study, the morning sunlight filtering through tall windows, casting long, thin lines across the polished wood of the desk. He sipped his coffee slowly, his mind already working, replaying every movement from last night. The fiancé's behavior had been flawless to anyone else, but he knew better. He had learned long ago that appearances were dangerous. They could hide betrayal, manipulation, and secrets too carefully guarded. He had noticed her phone, the quick glance, the hidden messages. He remembered her laugh, a little too practiced, her posture slightly off even when she smiled. And most importantly, he remembered the drink. It was a small thing, a single glass, but it spoke volumes. Someone had tried to take advantage, and he needed to know exactly what was happening before it escalated. The black girl appeared at his office unannounced, quietly stepping into the room without knocking, as if she had permission just by being there. She carried herself with the same calm confidence as the night before. She didn't smile, didn't apologize for showing up. She simply sat across from him, observing, waiting. He didn't need to ask for her report. He already knew she had been paying attention, the way she always did. "Tell me everything you saw," he said finally, his voice low and careful. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes steady, scanning him briefly to make sure he was paying attention. "It wasn't just the drink," she said. "I've noticed patterns before. The way she moves, the way she reacts, the small inconsistencies. Last night it wasn't random. She's hiding something." He nodded slowly, taking another sip of coffee. "I suspected as much, but I need proof. I can't just confront her without knowing for certain." She nodded too, almost imperceptibly. "Proof takes time, but trust me, she won't see it coming. I'll keep watching, notice the little things, and we'll know exactly what's going on before she realizes it." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their unspoken agreement filling the room. Both understood the stakes. One wrong move could destroy reputations, relationships, and possibly more. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He had dealt with betrayal before, but this felt different. This felt closer, more personal. The fiancée, meanwhile, was unaware that the first threads of suspicion had already begun to tighten around her. She went about her morning as usual, carefully arranging her schedule, making calls, and replying to messages. She laughed lightly at a joke from her assistant. But even in those small, controlled moments, there were tiny cracks. She didn't notice the way her phone had been moved slightly by the billionaire's assistant the night before, or the way her every action was being observed by someone she hadn't considered. By midday, the billionaire had begun setting subtle traps, not traps in a cruel or obvious sense, but carefully designed situations to test her reactions, to see if her actions matched her words. He watched, patient and calculating, knowing that time was on his side. The black girl assisted quietly, providing insight from a perspective he didn't always have. She had a way of noticing the unnoticed, seeing what most people ignored. One such moment came during lunch. The three of them met at a quiet restaurant, the kind where privacy was guaranteed. The fiancée chatted easily, her voice smooth, her movements elegant. But the black girl noticed the slight hesitation when the fiancé's hand brushed against a small hidden compartment in her purse. Nothing obvious, just a flicker, a pause that lasted less than a second. To anyone else, it would have been invisible. To them, it was a clue. "Did you feel that?" the billionaire asked casually, not looking directly at her. "Feel what?" she replied, smiling, completely unaware. "Nothing. I thought I saw something move," he said, shrugging, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. The black girl watched from her seat a few tables away. She had been quietly observing for weeks, noticing the patterns, connecting dots that no one else would see. And she knew that if they were careful, the truth would reveal itself without confrontation. It would become visible in her actions, in her reactions, in the tiny moments she couldn't control. The fiancée finished her lunch and left, completely unaware of the web being woven around her. The billionaire watched her go, then looked at the black girl. "She's hiding something, but I need to know how deep it goes," he said. She nodded. "And we will. Just keep watching, just like last night. Don't act too soon. Days passed like this. The billionaire continued to observe, following subtle changes in her behavior, noting what she said and what she avoided saying. The black girl checked in discreetly, providing insight, warnings, and interpretations of the fiancé's movements. Every text message ignored, every slight hesitation, every forced smile became a piece of the puzzle. Slowly, the outline of the truth began to appear. One evening, the fiancé invited the billionaire and the black girl to a private gathering at her apartment. She wanted to impress, to showcase wealth, elegance, and control, but the invitation was more revealing than she realized. Every detail, the arrangement of the room, the way she positioned guests, the drinks she offered, gave away small secrets. The black girl noticed immediately, and a quiet alarm sounded in her mind. "Watch the way she handles the drinks," she whispered to him as they arrived. He nodded subtly. He had seen the same patterns before and had learned to trust her instincts. They didn't need to say much. Observation was enough. The evening progressed. Guests chatted, music played softly in the background, and the fiancée moved with her usual poise. But the black girl's eyes were everywhere. She noticed the way one guest's glass seemed heavier than the others, the way the fiancé's hands trembled slightly when she poured, and the way her eyes darted toward the door as if expecting someone or something. Finally, there was a moment when the fiancé left the room briefly. The billionaire leaned slightly toward the black girl. "She's nervous," he said quietly. "She's hiding more than nervousness," she replied. "Pay attention to the small things. That's where the truth lives." It was a long night, but by the end, small revelations had emerged. The fiancé's carefully constructed image began to fracture, almost imperceptibly. She laughed too loud at a joke, hesitated when asked a question, and fidgeted when attention shifted unexpectedly. Each small slip was a victory for observation, a clue for what was coming next. As they left the apartment, the billionaire and the black girl walked silently, the city lights reflecting off wet streets from an earlier rain. The night was calm, but inside both were tense. They had learned more tonight than in weeks of observation, but the puzzle was not complete. The fiancé's deception was still largely hidden, her intentions still unclear, but now they had direction. They knew where to look, and they knew what to watch for. "I can see the truth starting to emerge," the billionaire said finally. "Patience," the black girl replied. "The truth doesn't rush. It shows itself when it's ready, and we need to be ready too." They parted ways quietly, both lost in thought. The billionaire returned to his office, thinking about strategy and timing, about how to protect himself while exposing the truth. The black girl returned to her small apartment, reviewing notes in her mind, replaying observations, and connecting dots. She had a gift for seeing what others overlooked, and tonight had proven that skill more valuable than ever. And all the while the fiancé moved through her world, blissfully unaware that the walls of deception she had built were slowly closing in. Each lie, each hidden act, each careful manipulation was being watched, recorded, and understood. The tension was growing, the stakes rising, and soon, every secret would be revealed. Part of the power of that evening was not just in the discoveries, but in the realization that appearances could never be trusted. The fiancé's perfect facade was fragile, vulnerable to the careful scrutiny of those who saw beyond it, and the billionaire, with the black girl's help, was learning exactly how fragile it truly was. By the end of part 2, the stage was set. Observations had turned into evidence, patterns into strategy, and suspicion into near certainty. The world outside continued unaware, but inside this small circle the truth was quietly taking shape. Each moment of care, each careful watch, and each silent note would soon matter more than anyone could imagine. The days following the private gathering passed with careful observation. The billionaire kept a quiet watch, his mind constantly replaying the fiancé's gestures, her words, her very presence. Every movement she made was a clue, every reaction a small piece of the puzzle. He wasn't in a hurry. He knew that truth, when exposed too quickly, could be dismissed, twisted, or hidden again. Timing was everything. The black girl had become his silent partner in this careful investigation. She moved through the city with a quiet confidence, observing, noting, and reporting without drawing attention to herself. Her life had always been about awareness, of noticing the subtle details most people ignored. And tonight, every small action mattered. They met in a small, quiet cafe one morning. The kind of place where the hum of conversation and the aroma of coffee created a comforting bubble of anonymity. He sipped his tea while she leaned back, calm but alert. "She's slipping," she said quietly, almost like a confession. He looked up, curious. "Slipping?" "Yes," she said. "The cracks are showing. The way she answers questions, the slight hesitation before she speaks, the little things she tries to cover up but can't. We just need to be patient. She'll reveal more, I promise." He nodded slowly. "I've never liked patience when someone is this close. But I see what you mean. If we push, she'll hide even more. Let her make the mistake herself." It wasn't long before the fiancé's first big mistake appeared. She had arranged a small dinner at her apartment, inviting a few close friends and associates. The evening was meant to be flawless, a display of elegance and control, but nothing she did could hide the tension growing inside her. Every gesture was overthought, every word carefully chosen. And yet, for all her planning, she could not control the subtle signals of guilt and fear that now surrounded her like a shadow. The billionaire and the black girl arrived quietly, blending into the atmosphere as if they were just another pair of guests. From the very first step, the black girl noticed the tiniest details. The way the fiancé's eyes flicked toward the door, the hesitation in her hands as she passed a drink, the brief flash of irritation when someone asked a casual question. Every small moment was a clue, and she collected them all silently. They were seated at the edge of the room, allowing the fiancé to move around freely without noticing their focused attention. She poured wine, smiled at her guests, and laughed lightly at stories she had heard before. But the tension in her movements betrayed her. The black girl leaned closer to the billionaire and whispered, "Watch the way she interacts with the drinks. One small slip and we'll know everything." He nodded, his attention unwavering. He had noticed the same subtle shifts already. The slight tremble of her hand, the nervous glance at the bartender, the micro-expressions that could reveal so much more than words ever could. They didn't speak again, only observed, knowing that the smallest comment could alert her and ruin the careful plan they had formed. It wasn't long before a guest complimented the fiancé on the choice of wine. She smiled, a little too brightly, and began explaining its origin, describing the vineyard in detail, her tone just a little too rehearsed. The black girl noticed the way she avoided eye contact with a certain person at the table, her hand brushing over the edge of the table as if to hide something underneath. "Right there," the black girl whispered. See how her hand moved? That's the moment she forgot to control herself. The billionaire followed her gaze and immediately recognized the subtle clue. His mind raced, connecting the pieces he had collected over the past days. There was no doubt now. The fiancé was hiding something, and it was bigger than a simple mistake or a harmless secret. As the dinner progressed, the tension increased. The fiancé tried to regain composure, shifting topics, engaging guests with laughter and charm, but her efforts were only partially successful. She had built a carefully controlled world around herself, but she had underestimated the power of observation. Every small slip was magnified in the eyes of those who were paying attention. Finally, there was a moment that would change everything. The fiancée excused herself briefly, leaving her drink unattended on the table. The black girl noticed immediately, a small, precise movement she had been waiting for. She nudged the billionaire subtly, and he leaned slightly toward the table. The drink had a faint residue, a substance barely visible to the untrained eye. It was a confirmation, a proof that the warning from the night before had been correct. Someone had tampered with the drink and the fiancé had allowed it to happen, whether knowingly or unknowingly. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. "She's playing a dangerous game," the black girl whispered. "We need to act carefully. One wrong move and she'll cover it up completely." The billionaire didn't reply immediately. He was watching, calculating. He understood that confrontation wasn't yet the answer. They needed a full picture before taking any steps. Evidence was essential and patience was the key. The evening continued, but the fiancé's confidence was now visibly shaken. She laughed less easily, her gestures more forced. She tried to regain control, offering drinks, engaging guests, and changing the topic, but the subtle tension in her body betrayed her. Every micro-expression, every blink, every hesitation told the story that she was desperately trying to hide. After the guests left, the billionaire and the black girl stayed behind under the guise of helping clean up. The fiancé remained in the kitchen, unaware that they were observing her every action. They noticed how quickly she checked her phone, the subtle panic in her movements, the way she touched the drinks again, almost as if making sure nothing had gone wrong. "She's scared," the black girl said softly. "Not just scared of being caught, but scared of losing control. That's her weakness. That's where we'll find the truth." He nodded, realizing the accuracy of her observation. The fiancée's fear was her own undoing. She had spent so much effort creating the perfect image that even the smallest slip now seemed catastrophic. The following days were spent in careful observation. The billionaire didn't confront her directly. Instead, he created small situations to test her. A misplaced item, a subtle question, an unexpected phone call, each carefully calculated to see how she would react. And each time she revealed something new. A hesitation here, a nervous glance there, a carefully hidden sigh that spoke volumes. The black girl's role became more important with each passing day. She was the quiet observer, the one who could interpret the tiniest details. She noticed the way the fiancé avoided certain topics, the way she reacted to unexpected situations, and even the way she interacted with people she thought were loyal. Each observation added to the growing mountain of evidence. One afternoon, the billionaire arranged a casual meeting with a mutual friend, pretending it was a chance encounter. The fiancé was present, confident and smiling. But the moment she was faced with an unplanned question, her composure cracked slightly. The way she answered, her hesitation, the slight quiver in her voice, it was all recorded in the mind of the black girl and the billionaire alike. "She can't hide it forever," the black girl said quietly. "Every reaction she has is giving us more than we need," he agreed silently, watching the way her fingers fidgeted with her phone, how her eyes darted to the nearest exit, and how her smile never quite reached her eyes. All the pieces were coming together, forming a picture that could no longer be ignored. By now, the billionaire had enough information to act, but he chose not to rush. He wanted the fiancée to continue revealing herself naturally. The more she exposed, the more undeniable the truth would be, and the black girl had learned long ago that patience often uncovered what direct action could not. The tension between the three of them was building, almost imperceptible to anyone outside their circle. To the untrained eye, it was just casual social interaction, but every subtle gesture, every tiny slip, every moment of hesitation carried meaning, and both the billionaire and the black girl knew exactly what those moments meant. Finally, the moment they had been waiting for arrived. The fiancé, overconfident and careless, made a move that revealed her intentions more clearly than any careful observation ever could. A message was intercepted, a drink was handled incorrectly, and a tiny gesture that she thought invisible became undeniable proof. The black girl noticed immediately, her heart pounding with the thrill of recognition. "Now we have it," she whispered. The billionaire didn't move or speak, only observed, letting the moment solidify. The evidence was clear, the truth undeniable. The fiancée's carefully constructed image was beginning to crumble, her secrets now exposed in subtle but unmistakable ways. As the evening drew to a close, they left quietly, knowing that the exposure was only beginning. The fiancée remained unaware, her world still seemingly intact, but the cracks were now visible to those who knew how to see. The billionaire and the black girl had all they needed to proceed, and the tension had reached a point where confrontation was inevitable. By the end of part 3, the stage was set. Observations had become evidence, patience had become strategy, and the fiancé's secrets were no longer hidden. The truth was now visible, and all that remained was to decide when and how to reveal it. The evening was cool, the kind of night where the city lights shimmered on wet streets and the air carried a quiet tension. The billionaire sat in his office, the black girl beside him, both reviewing every detail they had collected over the past days. There was no rush. They had been patient, gathering evidence, observing patterns, and waiting for the moment that would reveal everything. Tonight, that moment had arrived. He had planned the confrontation carefully, knowing that rushing could backfire. The fiancée believed she was in control, that her secrets were safe, that her carefully constructed image was flawless. She had no idea that the night had been silently orchestrated to expose her, and he wanted it done in a way that left no doubt, no opportunity for manipulation, no chance to escape responsibility. The black girl, as always, was calm. She had a way of observing that allowed her to notice things others could not. She could read subtle gestures, tiny facial expressions, and small inconsistencies that revealed hidden truths. She had already noticed the nervous tension building in the fiancé over the past days. Her small gestures, slight hesitations, and forced smiles were all pieces of the puzzle. Tonight, all those pieces would come together. The meeting was set in a quiet, private room at an upscale restaurant, somewhere elegant enough to command respect but private enough to avoid unwanted attention. The fiancé arrived unaware of the careful preparation, her posture perfect, her smile flawless, her demeanor confident. She believed she was stepping into a simple, routine evening. He greeted her calmly, his tone measured, his expression neutral. There was no sign of anger, no rush, no hint of confrontation. "I wanted to talk to you," he said quietly, guiding her to the table. "Some things need to be clarified." Her smile faltered slightly, though she hid it quickly. "Of course," and she replied, her voice steady but with the faintest tremor. "I'm happy to talk," the black girl observed from a nearby seat, remaining in the shadows. She was their silent witness, ensuring that every detail was recorded, every reaction noticed. She knew the fiancé's habits, her patterns, and her attempts at control. And she knew that tonight those habits would betray her. They began with small talk, ordinary conversation meant to relax the atmosphere. But beneath the calm words was a careful observation. He asked questions that seemed innocent, but were designed to reveal inconsistencies. Each answer she gave was measured, calculated, but the smallest cracks were visible. Hesitation, a shift in posture, a fleeting flicker of the eyes. Each subtle movement spoke volumes. Then, he leaned forward slightly, speaking in a calm, low voice. "About the other night," he began, watching her reaction carefully. "There was something I noticed, something that concerns me." Her hands tightened slightly around her glass, a subtle signal of anxiety. She smiled politely, but her eyes betrayed her. She was already calculating, trying to control the conversation, trying to maintain the image she had built. But he had already seen through it. "I don't know what you mean," she said smoothly, though the careful tone of her words couldn't hide the nervous tension in her voice. He waited, watching. Patience was key. He didn't need to raise his voice or accuse her openly. The evidence was already clear, the truth already visible. He simply needed her to reveal herself through her reactions. "I noticed the drink," he said finally, his voice calm, deliberate. "There was something wrong with it. Something that shouldn't have been there. Can you explain that?" For a moment she froze. The pause was brief but telling. She tried to mask it with a polite laugh, a casual gesture, but her body betrayed her. Her hands shook slightly, her eyes flicked away, and her smile faltered. The black girl leaned slightly unnoticed, observing every micro-expression. She could see the truth rising to the surface. The fiancé's attempts at control were failing, and every instinct she had to hide the truth was only making it more visible. I don't know what you're talking about," she said finally, her voice higher than intended, her composure strained. "It was just a drink." "Maybe someone else," he interrupted gently, cutting her off without anger. "I don't believe it was anyone else. I saw what happened. I know you know more than you're saying, and I need the truth." Her eyes widened slightly, panic beginning to surface. She realized that her carefully controlled image was crumbling, that the patience, observation, and careful planning of the people around her had cornered her. For the first time, she was confronted with the reality that deception, no matter how perfect, had limits. She tried again, a small smile, a polite tone, hoping to regain control. "I don't know what you mean." Everything was fine. The billionaire didn't react, only waited. And that waiting, that calm, unyielding patience was the weapon that exposed her. Slowly, her composure broke. The cracks grew wider, her gestures more uncontrolled. She glanced at the black girl briefly, not noticing her sharp gaze that understood everything she tried to hide. "I think maybe I made a mistake," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes darting between them. But it wasn't serious. "I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean?" he asked softly, leaning in. "Do you think this was harmless? A mistake that can be ignored?" She shook her head, her carefully constructed answers failing her. Her breath quickened slightly, her hands fidgeted with the glass, and her voice trembled. I didn't want to cause any trouble. You didn't want to cause trouble, but you did," he said, his tone still calm, almost disarmingly gentle. "And now the truth is out. I need to understand why. I need honesty." For a long moment she remained silent, caught between fear and pride. She had spent so much time controlling appearances, hiding mistakes and manipulating perception that admitting fault felt impossible. But with the evidence, with the careful observation, and with the calm confrontation before her, denial was no longer an option. Finally, she spoke, a low confession, almost defeated. "I thought I could manage it. I didn't think anyone would notice. I didn't mean to." Her voice trailed off, the mask of confidence she had worn for so long falling away. The billionaire listened carefully, his expression unreadable. He didn't respond with anger, only with quiet authority, letting her words sink in, letting the weight of her actions reveal themselves naturally. The black girl continued to observe, noting every tremor, every hesitation, every flicker of emotion. The truth was now visible, undeniable, and the consequences were about to follow. "You see," he said finally, his voice still calm, "actions have consequences. Intentions don't erase the impact. What you did could have been disastrous. And now I need to know, can you be trusted, or is this who you really are?" Her shoulders slumped slightly, the answer unspoken but clear in her eyes. She had been caught, and the carefully constructed image she had built was shattered. Her fear, shame, and regret were now plain for those who could see. The black girl noticed the change immediately. The fiancé's body language, her hesitation, the way her voice trembled, all confirmed what they had suspected. The truth was out, and there was no way to put it back. He continued, carefully but firmly, "Trust is earned through honesty, not secrecy. And tonight the honesty is undeniable. I need to understand every detail, and I need you to accept responsibility." The morning after the confrontation arrived with a quiet stillness that contrasted sharply with the tension of the previous night. The city was awake, moving with its usual rhythm, unaware of the storm that had quietly passed behind closed doors. But for the billionaire and the black girl, the world had changed. The truth had been revealed, and now the consequences were beginning to take shape. He sat in his office, reviewing the events in his mind. Every gesture, every hesitation, every word spoken during the confrontation had been carefully noted, analyzed, and understood. The fiancée had been exposed, her carefully constructed image broken, her deception laid bare. But exposure alone was not enough. The aftermath would require strategy, patience, and the careful handling of people and perceptions. The black girl entered quietly, as always. She carried no paperwork, no lists, no instructions. Her presence alone brought a sense of focus and calm. She had observed, she had guided, and she had ensured that every detail was recorded, and now she watched as he considered the next steps. "She knows," she said softly, sitting across from him. "She can't hide it anymore. But what she does next will matter more than what's already happened." He nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. Exposure had a way of changing people, forcing them to confront truths they had long avoided. Some would accept it, some would resist, and some would lash out in unpredictable ways. The key was to manage the fallout, to ensure that the truth did not create chaos but instead led to clarity and justice. Meanwhile, the fiancée was in her own space, processing the reality she had been forced to face. She moved through her apartment quietly, touching objects with a new awareness, realizing that nothing she had done could erase the exposure from last night. She had been caught, and the carefully controlled life she had built was now fractured. Fear, regret, and shame mingled in her mind, creating a heavy, uncomfortable weight that she could not shake. She tried to call a friend, seeking comfort or advice, but the words felt hollow. There was no one who could undo what had happened, no one who could repair the fragile web of lies she had woven. Every action, every carefully hidden secret had been observed and understood. She was left with only herself and the realization that her choices had consequences. The billionaire and the black girl had already begun to consider the broader implications. Social circles, business associates, and family members would eventually learn of the events. They needed to manage how the truth was revealed, ensuring it could not